I'm so excited for this conversation. We're joined by Marty Chavez. He is vice chairman and partner at Sixth Street Partners. He has spent so much of his career over at Goldman Sachs, becoming most recently CFO, and he built a lot of the technology infrastructure that you see there today. Marty, thank you for joining us. We're going to hone in on a topic that I know is really near and dear to you, and a topic that I know you think about a lot, given the disparities from Wall Street to Main Street, particularly when it comes to underserved communities, particularly when it comes to the Latino community, which has really fallen behind in this pandemic when it comes to access to capital for small business. And in the most recent employment report, of course, we saw really stagnant numbers there in terms of the Latino population being employed in America. So Marty, before we get to solutions, I'm wondering from your perspective, what is the root of this problem?
Wow. Root cause analysis is always tricky, Sonali. And by the way, I'm always happy to be here and talk with you. So a lot of the data and the facts that I'll be referencing come from the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Forum, which publishes a fascinating annual report. And look, there are many metrics by which Latino businesses are doing unbelievably well. If you just separate them out, they're growing faster than the non-Latino businesses in the US. And by some measures and in some years, Latinos in the US specifically are growing at the fourth highest rate in the world, which is a fascinating statistic. In terms of their credit scores, very similar to similarly positioned non-Latino businesses. But one thing that we observed, and you referenced it, is that Latino businesses are disproportionately positioned in industries that were severely affected by the pandemic. That's one fact. And then also in terms of their growth, they're severely constrained by access to capital. Latino entrepreneurs, for a variety of reasons, tend to bootstrap with friends and family and loans and credit cards, which is great. But past a certain point, it's difficult to grow with that source of capital.
Well, it's interesting. You and I have talked about this before. How much of this is systemic issues when it comes to the US economy and the credit environment, and how much of it is due to implicit bias?
Well, again, referencing the Stanford report, there are data that suggest quite strongly that Latino entrepreneur walks into bank, non-Latino entrepreneur walks into a bank, and they're just shown different products and guided into different conversations. And it's not clear where the source of the bias is. Maybe it's the industries that Latinos are disproportionately working in, and maybe it is implicit bias. Very hard to parse that out. And at some point, while I do love to know root causes, I just want to jump to solutions, and that's mainly a risk with me. I want to just think of things that we can do differently. And so certainly education, both of bank loan officers and specifically coaching Latino entrepreneurs. I think education is the answer to so many challenges.
Well, let's get to the solutions here a little bit. From your perspective, what can change in the near term, and how do we get there?
So I'll be thinking back pre-pandemic, and I remember those days. I was at Stanford and participating in the Latino Entrepreneurship Forum as a guest speaker. My brother Tom is deeply involved in that, and they're wonderful professors working on that. And there are solutions. I think what was exciting about being in that forum was just the way it convened Latino entrepreneurs. And I had my own biases of the kinds of businesses that Latinos would be founding. And there were some software as a service, enterprise analytics businesses. There were some machine learning businesses. It was fascinating what was going on and just the creative energy. And what was really exciting was the very specific coaching opportunities that the forum was creating. That was the reason I was there, to engage with a number of entrepreneurs, share with them my experiences, make recommendations, offer mentoring. And that is something that I found again and again. We found it at Goldman Sachs. It isn't just making loans available to these wonderful entrepreneurs. You need to show them how to access that capital, how to pitch for that capital. And one of the things that we did, for instance, in Goldman's 10,000 Small Businesses, and we do it at 6th Street in our collaboration with Concrete Rose, which makes capital available to historically underrepresented groups, is it isn't just making the capital available, it's coaching. One of my favorite career experiences was working with the wonderful Latina entrepreneur of Brooklyn Cupcakes. They were selling so many cupcakes that they needed some serious supply chain and logistics software. And that's something that my team could actually help with, not just provide the capital, but work with them and walk with them through all the elaborate and difficult steps of negotiating one of these contracts and getting all the right terms and getting the right price. So that coaching is important. Yeah.
It's so funny to think about a firm like Goldman Sachs, banking the neighborhood cupcake shop. And I'm wondering, this effort of banking underserved communities through efforts like 10,000 Small Businesses, they have existed for some time. And in the last 2 years, we have seen an elevated discourse around the opportunity and the need there is to help entrepreneurs, but there's still a gap. And I'm wondering, what is it going to take to push the capital markets, to push regulators over that final hump?
Well, Sonali, I wish there were a bright, shiny, instantly obvious solution, and that it would be just a gate, and then we'd be on the other side of that. Unfortunately, I think it's really just this continuous education, not just of the entrepreneurs. We know that, and there are forums to offer them that coaching and education, but the bank loan officers too. So there's education all around and increasing awareness. I know that many Latino entrepreneurs, and this is a generalization, are just not aware of other sources of capital. And that was one of the successes of 10,000 Small Businesses. It's actually in the context of 10,000 Small Businesses that I came to appreciate the dynamism of the Latino entrepreneur community, the breadth of the businesses they were founding, and the growth rate, which exceeded the growth rate of the non-Latino businesses, a number of Latinos who are entrepreneurs, which is a higher percentage than other groups. All of those things are exciting. You need to match that with coaching, education, capital. It's going to take time.
It's interesting because there is lending to small businesses, there's access to capital, but then there's also hiring and the talent part of this equation. And it's funny because you were a diverse entrepreneur and diverse executive at Goldman Sachs before we talked about diversity. So I'm wondering now, especially as you go to 6th Street, a lot of your role has also started with the idea of diversity and diverse talent in mind. How can things change such that the businesses that provide capital start to look more like the society they serve?
Well, this is something that we're passionate about at 6th Street, and it's something that I'm delighted to put my time and energy into. It's not something that's going to happen entirely on its own. It takes some active work. And what we've got to remember as we're engaging in this active work is that it's not altruism. It really is just an extension of something we all understand in finance, portfolio diversification. You can have greater returns with the same level of risk. If you would like, you can have same returns with a lower level of risk through diversification, or I would just say through diversity. We always think about diversifying underlying risk factor exposures, but we also need to think about diversifying to talent pools. It really is a free lunch. And so there's something in it for everybody. For private capital, you get diverse sets of entrepreneurs who will have diverse sets of risks. That's a good thing. And so I think making that argument that this isn't just the right thing to do, it's the commercially smart thing to do, that has been very successful on the sell side on Wall Street. Obviously, first steps on a very long journey, and the buy side is very much embracing that concept and working on it. Our collaboration with Concrete Rose is a great example. Our summer fellowship program is another great example of bringing diverse people into private capital. That makes us stronger and smarter, and it's also a good thing for society at large.
It's interesting. We talk about access to capital, but it really comes down to the right kinds of capital. Capital that's not too onerous when it comes to terms. And you look at what's happening on Capitol Hill and the idea that there's a bill that may make its way, co sponsored by Maxine Waters, to prevent Latino communities from being suspect to predatory lending. How difficult is it to make sure that entrepreneurs are getting capital on the right terms?
Well, again, Sonali, this is education and awareness. This is why we find it valuable at Sixth Street not to just be providers of capital, which is, of course, our job is to generate returns for our investors and provide capital and put capital in the ground, as we say. But it is also to educate the people who would be petitioning or seeking that capital on what makes sense for their business and what are appropriate terms. And so, as we find again and again, it isn't just providing money, it's also providing education, and it's educating on both sides. It's educating our own people in a bank, it's educating the bank loan officers, and then there's this education of entrepreneurs at scale. That is the reason for the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Forum, and the scale of that event is really staggering. It is why we work with the Chambers of Commerce and any other organization which Latinos to the upside disproportionately participate in, these business organizations, to provide that education, provide that awareness.
It's interesting because there's been so much excitement around the Latino community and a lot of very high profile executives and even celebrities in some instances. You saw Jennifer Lopez last year in the Bronx with David Solomon promoting small businesses. You see SoftBank also really committing to Latino entrepreneurs. You see you over at Sixth Street really focusing on the opportunity here. What can you say about the forces that will drive this investment moving forward, the evidence of the excitement that you see around it?
Well, so now it gets back to something I mentioned earlier, which is just if you look at the Latino entrepreneur community, the statistics, the creative dynamism are amazing. And so that is exciting in all kinds of ways. And it's also an exciting commercial opportunity for providers of capital. You want to see that kind of dynamism in a sector. And it's also just going to take time. And also we have to rely on the commercial incentive, which is if you diversify everything, if you diversify the people, the communities, the industries, the sectors, the kinds of businesses, that's great for portfolio construction. Again and again, being diverse and representing a couple of diverse groups on Wall Street, I found that the breakthrough comes not when you are telling people you need to do this because it's the right thing to do. And I believe people want to do the right thing. But if you couple that with just the commercial opportunity, this is good for your business. This is great for your risk-adjusted returns. And yet another reason to do that. Those two, when they hook up, are powerful.
Could the movement be possible without executives like you who are stepping up for members of the Latino community because you understand the struggles that they have faced vis-a-vis their other peers?
I think it's a sacred obligation to do that, right? I've just been incredibly fortunate. I grew up in one of those incredibly scrappy, hardworking communities. I love telling the story about my mother who grew up in the barrio in Barelas in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and somehow randomly decided that she was going to send all their kids to Harvard, right? So I've been an unbelievable beneficiary of all of that. So this is giving back. On the other hand, I'm just one person, and I'm not confused that I'm going to make this huge difference, but I think all of us showing up, talking about this, and much more importantly, providing capital, seeking out these businesses from historically underrepresented groups, and coupling that with our own understanding of what's great for the returns that we're creating for our investors, right? Seeing those better risk-adjusted returns by actively working in the sector, by actively coaching and mentoring the entrepreneurs, which is something I spend a lot of time on. that all of those things are going to make a difference. But I'm just one small contributor. Many need to show up and do this at scale.
It's been, I guess, now 2 or 3 years since I last asked you this. You've said before that you felt like you had to work twice as hard to get as much or even part of as much as everybody else. And I asked you a few years ago whether that was true, and you said yes. Do you think now, again, that might be changing at all?
Oh, Sonali, maybe the ratio is changing. Maybe it's not twice as hard. I might have said to you, maybe on TV, maybe not, that being gay and Hispanic, I always told myself you needed to work 10 times as hard. I'm not sure that's a fact. It's just a feeling. It's certainly what I got from mom again. She just told us that. And I think that was valuable too. Being told that was another way of saying, and you got to work really hard. And working really hard isn't by itself going to do it. That's why we're talking about all of these other activities to bring down the barriers, to create more opportunity and more scale. I think everybody leaning in and working on it, the entrepreneurs, but telling them to work harder, they're already the scrappiest group that you can imagine.
Well,
That's not enough.
that's why I bring it up also. It takes a very specific type of DNA to rise to the top of Goldman Sachs in that way. And with this renewed focus of mental health and livelihoods in this pandemic, do you worry about that idea of working 10 times as hard to get as much?
Well, like being told you got to work 10 times as hard creates an underdog mentality, and probably that kind of tenacity and raw work is necessary to get anywhere. At the same time, there are consequences. One thing that I said all the time in my mentoring at Goldman Sachs and say at Sixth Street, and I think I've been mostly not perfectly consistent with it, is that I never made work my number one priority in my life. My number one priority in life has always been my peace of mind. If I don't have my peace of mind, then I'm not of any use to anybody else. And then right after that is my family. And then number 3 is my work. And that, when I first started saying it maybe 15 years ago, was shocking to a lot of people. You were supposed to put work number 1, otherwise you shouldn't be working on Wall Street. I never thought that made sense over the long term. And I think I mostly live that. I'll give myself a B- on being consistent with that set of priorities and working to get an A. I think that we will all be better and smarter and wealthier if we have our priorities right, and work needs to be up there. But if it's your number one priority, I'm not sure that that's good for anybody, including.
Do you think, I mean, the onus is on managers to also realize that burden that their Latino and diverse populations feel as they seek to rise?
Well, it is an onus that's on managers. And that's something that I'm passionate about and have worked on and have attempted imperfectly to be that myself, to be that person who could understand that the right ordering of priorities is right for the business. It is certainly something that we live and breathe at Sixth Street. It's one of the things that I absolutely love about Sixth Street. We know that everybody needs to have a life, and having a life is actually good for business. And that just this sort of simple-minded prioritization of work above all doesn't necessarily lead to the best result. People need peace, they need family, they need a lot of things. And when they have all these things, they can be really productive. Managers need to realize that. We are training and coaching our managers to know it and to bring it into their actions. Very much a work in progress.
Marty, we only have about a minute left here, but I'm wondering if you have any final thoughts to leave our audience with about the opportunity there is here.
So when we look at the Hispanic community, the Latino community, remembering that even within that community, it's not a racial category, it's cultural, linguistic, and it's very, very broad. There's incredible diversity in that community, and understanding that community and understanding the commercial potential of the community is something that the rest of us need to do a lot more work on. And the reason we need to do it again and again is that A, it's the right thing to do, and B, there is some untapped potential when you look at the growth rates, and then when you look at the numbers of the community and the depth and breadth of the community. There is a vastly undercapitalized, underbanked sector, and we all need to work on that, not just because it's the right thing to do for the stability and dynamism of society, but it's also a commercial imperative. It's also great for business.
Marty, thank you so much for joining us. That is Marty Chavez, long-standing Goldman executive and now the vice chairman of Sixth Street Partners, on a conversation about investing in the Latino community and bridging these gaps in equality while also doing good business. And thank you all for joining us for day one of the year ahead. We really hope you enjoyed these conversations. And thank you again to all of our speakers for such a wonderful program. And thank you to our presenting sponsors, Wholesome and Invest Promotion Agency Qatar, and our presenting knowledge partner, McKinsey & Company. If you'd like more information from our sponsors, please visit the resources tab on your screen. And most of all, thank you for being such an engaged audience. To watch any part of this event, you can return to bloomberglive.com to view on demand. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow for day 2.